All right, let's dive into a story that, on the surface, makes absolutely no sense. We're going to connect two worlds that could not be further apart. The super-fast, supercharged world of Silicon Valley and the quiet, ancient wisdom of the Himalayas. And believe it or not, this connection would go on to shape the very technology you're probably using right now.
I mean, really think about that question. What on earth could possibly link one of the greatest tech visionaries of our time to a holy man in India whose only real possession was a simple blanket? It sounds like a riddle, right?
Well, here's the twist. It wasn't just Steve Jobs. The founders of Facebook and Twitter, and even the guy who ran Google's massive charity arm, they were all, in one way or another, deeply influenced by this one man, Neem Karoli Baba, or as his followers just called him, MaharajJi.
So, picture this. It's the 70s, and a young Steve Jobs is totally lost. He goes to India searching for answers. Now, he actually arrived just after MaharajJi had passed away, but the vibe of the ashram, the stories, the whole atmosphere, it just hit him hard. This search for simplicity wasn't just some personal side quest, it became the blueprint for Apple. Think about it. Elegant, easy to use, focused. That all started here.
So you have to wonder, what was going on in the world that made all these young people, including future billionaires, drop everything and head east? To get that, we need to talk about a legendary path called the Hippie Trail.
Yeah. This was not your typical vacation. This was a gritty, overland journey. People would start in London or Amsterdam and just go. They'd travel through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, all the way to India. It was about rejecting all the stuff, all the materialism of the West, and searching for something real, something deeper.
And the journey itself was part of the experience. Just imagine it, 10 people crammed into an old VW bus, sleeping out under the stars, just trying to make their way through a world that was completely new to them.
And let's be real, this was seriously dangerous stuff. We're talking about sketchy mountain roads, run-ins with bandits, and really tense border crossings. You only made a trip like this if you were absolutely desperate for what you hoped to find at the end of it. And for so many of these travelers, the end of that incredibly long, hard road was a small, humble ashram in the foothills of the Himalayas. And it was there that they finally met the man who seemed to have all the answers they were looking for.
This is him, Neem Karoli Baba. He looks simple, nothing flashy. But people who met him said it was an experience that you couldn't just see with your eyes. As one follower said, the real miracle wasn't magic tricks, it was just being in his presence. It was this overwhelming feeling of pure, unconditional love.
There's actually a word for this in India, darshan. It's this idea that just seeing a holy person can be a sacred, life-changing experience. But MaharajJi's power wasn't always quiet. Sometimes it showed up in ways that completely defied logic. In fact, the most legendary story of all is how he got his name in the first place.
Okay, so the story goes like this. When he was just a young holy man wandering around, he gets on a train and sits in a first-class coach. He doesn't have a ticket. When the British ticket collector comes by, he gets furious and just kicks this young man right off the train in this tiny little village called Neem Karoli.
So MaharajJi just calmly goes and sits under a tree. Meanwhile, back at the station, the conductor blows the whistle, the engineer cranks the engine, and nothing. The train will not move, not a single inch. They tried everything. They checked the engine. They even brought in another locomotive to try and push it, but it was completely stuck, like it was glued to the track.
Finally, some of the local people tell the railway officials, "Hey, you guys made a really big mistake." So totally desperate, the officials go over to MaharajJi and beg him to get back on the train. And he agrees, but he has two conditions. First, they have to promise to treat all holy men with respect from now on. And second, they have to build a proper train station for the people of Neem Karoli. The officials promise, and the second MaharajJi steps back onto that train, it starts up like nothing ever happened. The railway kept their word, and from that day forward, he became known as Neem Karoli Baba, the holy man from Neem Karoli. It's an amazing story, and it's almost like an analogy, right? It's as if MaharajJi is the power switch for the universe. The world thinks it's running on these big, powerful engines, but he showed that grace is the real electricity. You kick the power off the train, and the whole machine is useless until you invite that grace back on. Now, this kind of divine power wasn't just some old local legend. It was something that modern, skeptical Westerners saw with their own eyes. The most famous story comes from Ram Dass, who used to be a Harvard professor named Richard Albert. A few years earlier, he'd given MaharajJi some LSD, but he always had this little nagging doubt in the back of his mind. Like, maybe he just faked taking it. So 3 years go by,
And out of the blue, MaharajJi asks him for more of that medicine. Ram Dass gives him 3 super strong tabs of acid. But this time, MaharajJi makes a point of it. He takes each pill one by one and swallows it slowly, looking right at Ram Dass the whole time, as if to say, "You watching closely."
And what happened? Absolutely nothing. He showed zero effect from a dose that would have sent anyone else to the moon. His only comment was this incredible piece of wisdom. He said that drugs like that can give you a peek. They let you see into the room with Christ, but you can't stay there. True enlightenment wasn't about a temporary visit. It was about earning the key to live in that room permanently.
So when you get past all the mind-blowing miracles and crazy stories, what was he actually teaching? What was the core message that drew in all these brilliant people? Well, it turns out it was unbelievably simple.
Really, it all came down to just a few key ideas. First, love everybody, all the time, no exceptions. Second, something called seva, which is just selfless service, helping people without expecting anything back. And third, mindfulness, just being totally present in whatever you're doing.
You can basically boil his entire philosophy down to this one beautiful line: love everyone, serve everyone, and remember God. It wasn't about complicated rules or rituals. It was about how you lived your life every single moment.
Now, MaharajJi left his body in 1973, but his influence didn't stop. You could actually say that's when it really started to take off, creating these ripples that are still spreading today in some very surprising ways.
Get this story. There was a young doctor at the ashram named Larry Brilliant. One day, MaharajJi just points at him and says, "Go to the World Health Organization and get your job." Larry was like, "What? I don't know anybody there." But he listened, and incredibly, he ended up being a key player in one of the biggest public health victories in human history, wiping smallpox off the face of the earth.
And we're not talking about a small team here. In India alone, there were about 150,000 people working on this. It was the perfect real-world example of MaharajJi's teaching of selfless service, of seva, but on a truly global scale.
This is how MaharajJi talked about himself. Not as a person stuck in one body, but as a presence, like the wind, that's available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's that idea that explains how someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who never even met him, could be inspired by his story decades later.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. This whole story, it's more than just a cool piece of tech history. It really makes you ask, in this crazy, fast-paced world we live in, what is the place of ancient wisdom? How does a simple message of love and service not only survive, but maybe become essential to the very things we build for our future?